Okay, our next speaker, Klaas van Egmond. I think most of us in Holland know him. Very inspiring personality who can combine thinking of the future with thinking of the past, with cultural identity of different people, and is one of those people that we need for the story of Paul to actually make the change and understand what we should change and understand why it's so urgent to change. So Klaas, the floor is yours. Klaas van Egmond. And after 25 minutes, he asked me to wave, as he usually forgets time. I know your story is needs far more and is far more interesting than only 30 minutes, like Paul's story. But less is more, I say. So Klaas, go ahead. Very nice to have you here. Klaas van Egmond.
Thank you very much, Max. Dear young leaders, indeed, it is already said, when you are looking into the future, when you want to face the future, you should look into history. And I'm a little bit older than you are at this moment on average, so looking back is something we have to do in the first place. And I always start my presentations over the last years with this picture. And Paul Gilding was also referring it already to it. It's the work of Jürgen Renders, he was calling that name, and also of Dennis Meadows, and it's of the Club of Rome in 1972, 40 years ago. And during my career in doing all this environmental research, we, with our study groups here in the Netherlands, were studying literally along those lines. We made many reports for governments, even hundreds, about this problem, about these curves, about resource depletion, about the industrial output, about population growth, food production, and what have you. And the striking thing is that notwithstanding the fact that everything up till now, and I can assure you, it's also from a scientific point of view, it has been proven that everything is going exactly according to this program. So notwithstanding the fact that economists didn't foresee the current crisis, these ecological studies already back in 1972 hinted at exactly the fact that more or less around this time, 2010, there would be a collapse in the industrial output, and all the other things are following then as well. So the whole idea that growth cannot go on forever, that's what you're seeing here, is on the table for 40 years already. And the big question, of course, is why does nobody has been waking up so far? My approach this morning is to shift our shares a little bit back and to try to delineate an underlying pattern in this whole thing. Why are we not waking up given this event? Well, so this is the threefold crisis we have at this very moment. I think, and we will discuss it a little bit later, that the whole Wall Street thing, the financial crisis, is one of the big causes in the whole thing, and of course, resource depletion is a very well-known fact as well. Looking back, shifting back in time, we can see that for the last 40 years we have, and Paul also was referring to that, we have the ecological crisis. Nothing wrong with this industrial activity over there, but when we are exaggerating, when it's too much, we are going over the carrying capacity. Paul was referring to 1.5 Earths we are using. That's the ecological crisis discussed already over the last 40 years. Shifting further back in time, we see more disruptions. For there's not only, in my feeling, one disruption at this moment, there have been many in history. And what can we learn from these earlier disruptions to avoid the next one? This is an earlier crisis. It's called Nazism and all the things we have over there. And you might think, what has that to do with this, our ecological crisis? I think quite a lot. It's an exaggeration of certain values in society which go their own way. It's a mechanism reinforcing itself. And before the end of the day, you are in such a social catastrophe. So there is not only an ecological catastrophe, there is a social and an economic one as well at the same time. Going back further in time, this is another catastrophe, where we have also an exaggeration of certain values. In this case, collective values. Exaggeration brings a catastrophe. Why is this important? This is also important given the fact that over the last decades we have seen in the world and in this country a huge scale of privatization, railways, telephone companies, what have you. And every time in the Council of Ministers, the idea was, where are we going to privatize this thing? The idea was to avoid Soviet Russian disasters. So the disaster in the East 50 years ago has been a driving force to shift to the neoliberal ideas we have at this moment. It's an action-reaction scheme. The next disaster is longer ago. It's the Inquisition. During the Middle Ages, and even before that, we had an enormous amount of religious wars, and they are also stemming from the fact that certain values, in this case more spiritual, collective values, are exaggerated. They become their own, society become their own caricature, and this means the end of lives for millions of people in Europe. For centuries, this has been the great disruption in Europe. What can we learn from that? When we will zoom out a little bit, maybe we can see the underlying pattern. Apparently, they have something in common, and let's discuss what it is. These are orientations where we can see on top, it's saying more or less immaterial values. Here we are on the lower part, we're discussing more material values. On the right-hand side, it's the I, discussed also earlier by Sharon and Simona. It's over here, and the collective we is on the left-hand side. And when we want to understand what's going on in the lower right, we see here Ayn Rand, and we see Margaret Thatcher or Meryl Streep. Nowadays you never know who is who. But nevertheless, she had nice thoughts. She was saying that there ain't no such thing as society. So she was denying the values on the left-hand side of this picture. And then the whole thing shifted into what we are seeing now. So my statement is that the current crisis is an exaggeration of a normal, be it a little bit one-sided idea of people like Thatcher and Ayn Rand, that we should do things in a very liberal way and there ain't no such thing as society. The next crisis, of course, the ecological crisis, we discussed already a little bit, and Paul did as well. What is the reason why we have this Nazism, the big problems of the World War II in there? The fact is that we have Darwin, nothing wrong with Darwin, stressed that 10 times, but the ideas of Darwin, and that has been very well documented over the years, is shifting by exaggeration into what we are calling the Holocaust and the Nazism. So it's again a mechanism in society in which normal ideas, more or less normal, be it one-sided, are shifting into its extreme. The same holds, of course, for Mr. Stalin over here. We have Mr. Marx. Mr. Marx was more or less won over Thatcher. He was saying that there ain't no such thing as the individual. People are formed by their social conditions. And that's a nice idea. It's a little bit on the left-hand side of this picture, but nevertheless, you can think that. But when it's going to be exaggerated, again, there is disaster. The next disaster is upper left. When we have the church over here, early Christianity started more or less here, and then we get the church organizing the way of thinking of people. The idea is that in the right-hand side of this picture, everybody is on his own, liberal thinking, my own thoughts, so everybody has his own truth. Popper, every observation takes a point of view. But on the left-hand side, there's one truth, and the church has it over here. And when you don't have it, in those days, you were burned at stake. And that happened with many people, and there has been all these wars over the years. So the idea is that there is in our value orientation something wrong. There are one-sided orientations. That's our human freedom. Thatcher and Darwin and Marx and the Pope, they might think what they want, but it's exaggerated and it becomes catastrophe. And what can we learn from that? So the idea is that when we are just clearing the picture, then you can see that it's indeed this value orientation between materialism and an idealistic immaterial orientation. And it's between a more regional, I-centered orientation, I here and you there, the part versus the whole. The part is on the right-hand side and the whole is on the left-hand side. And we can have all sorts of value orientations in there. So societies have an orientation which is dominating and people, individuals as well. So apparently I'm saying that there are these tendencies in the value orientation to shift to the outer part of our value system, and that in history something happens like this, that we were starting 2,000 years ago, more or less here, then we shifted with the Pope to the left-hand side, then we had a debate between church and science for 1,000 years. We, scientists, have won. We kicked out the Pope from the bishop in Utrecht from his buildings, and we are there. And now we are ending here together with Francis Fukuyama, at the end of history. Our history comes to an end in this part of the picture. The movement in history is centrifugal. That implies that we are enlarging all these value extremes, and we get catastrophes. And the last catastrophe will be in this part of the whole value scheme, and this is what you're going to see. Decadence, hedonism, fragmentation. All these things here are not my words. They are from Sorokin, a sociologist from the 50s. Already 70 years ago, he warned for what's going to happen over here. Now you might say, what is this value pattern coming from actually? It's a value pattern we have as people. Everybody of us here has this value orientation, and we might have our accents in there. For example, I might have a tendency to have my identification on the extreme right-hand side. Don't forget that the psychologist Jung was saying that we are so unaware of ourselves that we need to have an identification in the periphery of this picture. So I can blow up my ego, for example. And you know many people, of course, you can see them on television every night, for example, who are doing that. And that's not good for society. For the people, it's not good as well. It becomes a psychosis. In psychology, when you are making your value pattern one-sided extreme, it's called a psychosis. And people as well, society, is becoming time and over in a state of psychosis. On the other side, you can be a fan of Ajax, Amsterdam over here, of Manchester United, and then your ego, you can leave your ego behind. That's also quite nice every now and then. And then you can be just one of the Ajax fans, and you can say, I think what Ajax is thinking. And well, that is a mechanism described by Erich Fromm, a German philosopher. And when it happens here in Amsterdam, in football, it's nice, but when it happens in München 1933, it's a catastrophe. Another mechanism is the lower side. This is a famous book from a Dutchman, Dick Swaap, and he is describing our human beings as an ecological, a biological computer. Okay, you can think that, but that's a little bit materialistic thinking. No things about spiritual things up there. It's only we as an evolutionary mechanical thing. And this is the identification with my car. I am my car. And the whole thing about consumption, discussed by Max and Paul a few seconds ago, is about identifying yourself with the material stuff. That's why you need it. And when you are free of that psychosis, more or less more to the center or other part of this picture, no need to buy that stupid car. You can also fly away in a purple dress on the upper right-hand side of the picture. With a New Age movement. That's very nice, but will not be of great help. And what also will not be of great help is upper left. When you have the spiritual orientation on top and the collective one truth orientation on the left-hand side, then you get this fundamentalistic religious groups, and that will not be of great help either. So these are the extremes, and you might say, how come? We arrived at that evaluation of the human value pattern by just asking 3 times 10,000 Dutchmen and Europeans about their value orientation. And the previous picture, what you saw, and what you also saw a little bit earlier in history as a basic value pattern of human beings, is this picture. And these are Dutchmen. And you can see, these have a religious orientation over here. These are more materialistic, luxury seekers, hedonists. They like big cars and big swimming pools and what have you. These are students, cosmopolitans. They like the big world. These are small world people. We here in Amsterdam, well, that's a big city, of course, but we here in some small area, they are conservative. Here we have 2/3 of the people being in this pie charts parts are feminine, and 2/3 over here are masculine. So there's a big change in value orientation between women and men, apparently. And this is just confirming the previous picture, where we have the idea of the I versus the other on the left-hand side, right-hand side, left-hand side. That's the horizontal relation between people. And the vertical relation is the relation between mind and matter, between stuff and between ideas. Or you might also have a spiritual, religious notion with that, of course. And when you're looking into the philosophy of the last 2,000 years, for example, you can overlay that with people like Plato in the center over there. And you have here Hegel, for example, and this is the earlier called Erich Fromm. This is the vertical relation, and they all describe that. And in the horizontal, we have the relation described by people like Kant over here, Levinas, French philosopher, Carl Gustav Jung, psychologist, Wolfgang Pauli, physicist. So there is an enormous amount of evidence that this is our basic value pattern. There is more evidence to come. This is the circle again, this is our value orientation, and the idea is that there are centrifugal forces which are bringing us as an individual and as society outside of the domain of generally accepted human values. And well, then we have, there is the need for identity, that's an important mechanism. There's a fear for freedom which is in the center. So Fromm is saying that we fear those freedom. So that's why we are just fleeing into the center. We are fleeing into the football club to be there in the safety of the collectivity over here. So this is evil, and you might think that there is something good at the other side. There are centripetal forces bringing you to the center, and that is things like empathy, love, compassion, understanding, all those things. And then we have at the other side, such a centripetal force might become again a centrifugal force. So the good is, or the bad, sorry, the bad is the good at the wrong moment, you might say. Nevertheless, something wrong over here is, we have something wrong at the other side, and the good is in between. And that's just what Aristotle has said a few thousand years ago. Between two virtues, the vice is here, vice is there, and the virtue is in the center. So we have we need a development in society in which we are having these centripetal forces quite strong. Otherwise, we are going into these catastrophes. And here you have also the word diversity, of course, and this mutualism Sharon and Shimona were talking about, that is about the force into the center, avoiding the periphery and its catastrophes time and over. So it's all about, in psychology and in society, of reconciliation of the opposites. That's what all these philosophers are saying. And of course, you might say, yeah, how are we going to do that? Well, that can be organized in society, in the political system, in the financial system, and in the economical system, as we will see a few moments later. Nevertheless, the values which we are discussing now here in the center, but in that circle, is called human dignity. In Dutch, it's saying menselijke waardigheid. And there is in the word values. So human dignity is about the set of values which is still in cohesion with each other, which is still intact, in which they don't fall apart. When you are coming outside the circle, things fall apart and the center cannot hold, to quote the Irish poet William Butler Yeats. So there is a lot of evidence for this whole message in our civilization, in our culture over the last 1,000 years. This, for example, is the Celtic cross, you know, and the vertical dimension over here and the horizontal is exactly referring to those axes I described you. Also, many religions, Christianity is also about the first commandment and the second commandment. It's about the vertical relation with the spiritual and the horizontal relation between people. Love thou neighbor on the left-hand side as thyself on the right-hand side. It's also in the psychology of this mentioned Carl Gustav Jung. It's also in the whole yin-yang story of Taoism. It's also in many legends, and the whole story of King Arthur, for example, is exactly the same message. There's no time for this, but I could also could have shown you that in many fairy tales, like Cinderella, for example, it's exactly about the same message. In music, from Mozart to Wagner, it's the same story. And they all are telling us, be aware of this mechanism of your own value orientation, stay away from the periphery, and mobilize forces and organize forces which are bringing you more or less to the center. That is the message, time and over. And well, when we are applying that then for corporate social responsibility, the idea is that also people, that is the collective, in a more spiritual, immaterial sense, the planet system, this is the other, the it from the other discussions, and this is my own prophet, there should be also something in the center over there. And real leadership is exactly being in the center. That King Arthur I showed you a few seconds ago, the whole story of the leadership of King Arthur is not having a big marketing or what do you have you nowadays on television. Those leaders like Mandela are very silent ones, and they are just doing nothing else at reconciling the opposites. And by doing so, in a structured sense, it's like Hegel saying it's thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And then it's not having this position and that position, summing up, dividing by two. No, it's making something really new from these opposing values. That's the essence of human being and should be the essence of sustainability. It's the same, exactly. Well, this picture I included, given also the talk of Sharon and Simona, where we have diversity in the action plan. She was indeed saying that you need diversity apart from uniformity. That's the horizontal axis in our previous picture. And in the center of, again, in the center of those two extremes, you have your sustainability optimum. For on the left-hand side, uniformity means efficiency, growing wheat. Very nice to do it in a big wheat field, but it's quite vulnerable for plagues, for example. And having the diversity of a meadow in the Alps with many species brings you resilience. And in between there is an optimum. And also in that physical sense, it's always the same story. Avoid the extremes and look for the center of the orientation. Well, then we have democracy, of course. Many people would say, well, we have democracy, so what's the problem? Now, you can decide in a democracy to deplete all the resources, for example, or to start a war against somebody else. So democracy will not do. There is more needed than democracy. And in democracy, up till now, we have implicit societal ends. And these ends are just economic growth. I've worked in The Hague with all these studies for decades, and I asked ministers, what is the end of the policy, your objective? What are you aiming at? And some said we are aiming for economic growth in GNP terms, and others said we are going for full employment for everybody. So there was not a clear definition of what we are going for. The values we want to develop in sustainable development are not explicitly known. Now, here you have the economic system. This is the real economy, and here we have the financial system. And you know, as well as I do, we are here in the ABN AMRO building, so the right place to discuss this. There is now a reversal of means and ends. The financial system has taken the lead in our current system. It's controlling the real economy, more or less. And our value pattern we are discussing so far is just beyond the horizon. And what we actually should do, of course, is having a system in which our values, that's the things we want to develop in sustainable development. Paul also discussed that. Values, do you want having culture, reading a book or a big car? Do you want to have a relation, friends, or play the piano for yourself? All those values are over here. So these are the ends and these are the means, and we should redress the real economy and the financial system, underlined 10 times, in this sequence. So restructuring ends and means. And you should realize that we have discussed these values now over here in terms of that value system in which we are going to the extreme time and over. But the underlying real economy should be nothing else as the system, the physical system, to realize those values. So when I want to, for example, when we want to have communication discussion with Paul Gilding, that's a nice idea on the level of ends. We want to enrich our thinking. Then we need, on the level of the real economy, either a plane or a Skype connection or whatever, but there is something necessary to realize that. And that is the real economy. And it should be a mirror of the value system up there. So the real economy is also, can be described in terms of the value system. And then you have the normal economic goods. For example, in this area, we have the collective material common pool resources, like oil, gas, the ecosystem. over here we have public goods, and this part of the picture is the private, individual part where we have the material and immaterial private goods. And economy is nothing else than that we are converting nature, upper left, via a whole sequence of production-consumption cycles to something with physical labor and mental labor into capital. And capital is nothing else as saved labor. When we have done some good thinking and good physical work, we may have some spare time left, and we can say to somebody of us, you are free to go and play the piano for us now. And that capital can be used as a consequence to produce a culture over here. So the economic system is nothing else than converting nature via human interaction into culture. And that's very beautiful, I think. So that should be the ideal case. But the world is not that ideal. We have a situation that we have a financial system over here, where they, in this building maybe, they are producing capital with capital. And by now you should realize that my whole proposition is that when we are having the creation of values, value creation is another word for economy. So we have first values and then we have value creation. This value creation should be according to our values. So this is human dignity. Stay with your economy, with your production, within the domains of human dignity. And the guys over here are not doing that. They are producing more money with money outside the system, and I think you can then say we don't like that. When we are discussing the radical center, as the Christian parties are doing now in this country, given also on background of this way of thinking, the radical means that you are saying no to the extremes over here. So it gives you a title to say, thank you for this, but we don't want that anymore. And we don't want anymore these religious extremes over here. And we don't want the things over here. And that's an example. Well, now we have this financial system, and the idea is that they are directing the economy. They are giving credits to activities, functions, to quote Amartya Sen and Martin Nussbaum, capabilities which makes us capable of having these values realized. And well, there is a small amount of money going to public things like culture, music, all the debates about concert halls, which are the subsidies are cut off at this moment by the government out of money over here. These groups will not finance that. They will finance especially, and that's the problem, the sequence of the resources, the resource depletion over here, via physical labor back to capital. So this shortcut in the economical system is a very dramatic one. Why are they doing that? Because the fact that in this part of the picture, the labor productivity is far much higher than in the service domain in the upper left. Your piano teacher is not able to learn to play the piano every year 10% faster. That will not be possible. Maybe it depends also on you. But on the other hand, here you can have technology, mental labor, coming into a picture, and the pumping around of stuff from the earth, appropriation to the right hand, to the left hand, to the right hand side. So this is public property actually also. That's privatized over here, and then this floating around. So this economy is reinforcing time and over the lower right hand side of this value pattern. And then you might say, wait a minute, we also have preferences. I don't want to buy the iPhone. You might say that iPhone is something here. It's quite immaterialistic, and it connects you with other people. So, bad example maybe. But I don't want the big car over here. But there is, of course, then also an enormous campaign in marketing to shift your preferences to the area over here. The media are just discussing all these things every day, and they are learning you that it's normal that the guys up there are speculating with the food for third world people, for example. And everybody's saying, well, that's quite normal. They have the right to do so. They are paying for it themselves. But our whole value pattern is gradually shifting to the outer side over here, and then we think that is normal. And catastrophes in history always have been when the thinking over here, thinks that it represents the whole. And we should finalize that. And you might say, wait a minute, who is telling me where those values actually are. Maybe a neoliberal would say, shift it a little bit, 5 minutes or less. Shift it a little bit to the right. And a socialist might say, shift a little bit to the left. But Habermas, the great philosopher, is saying that he's calling this the societal cohesion. You should discuss that time and over in society, and it's always preliminary, but then there is a consensus over what we think human dignity is. And when we have decided that, on a preliminary basis, we might say to the guys up here, sorry, we don't like that. So it's all about the enormous resource use, which is the consequence of this, and the cyclicity, discussed by Sharon and Shimona, is coming in here. When we should enable this shortcut, then also this cyclicity could return. Last sheet. What about then, for example, the financial system? This has also, by the way, implications for the political system. We have no time to discuss that today, and we are discussing the economic things. But you also can imagine that change in the political system in which you have majority governments which are fighting against each other, which are generating centrifugal forces by doing so, that we should say goodbye to the system as well. And we should reorganize it. It can be very easy. And by doing so, we could enforce the more centripetal forces, making more cohesion in society and making the ability larger, increasing the ability to solve these enormous problems we are facing. Last sheet, what should be done in terms of the financial economical system? This private banking here is working now for the whole of our value pattern, but they are doing that from a partial thinking on the lower right. That's fundamentally wrong. What's also wrong is that this private banking is confused with public responsibility. You know the rule, private gains, public risks. And this way of thinking generates the idea that they should serve the private part of society. They will give credits to Apple for your iPhone. And public banks should organize the whole infrastructure of society. So all those artists here in Amsterdam who are now out of money, when the government is also going to do banking, that means also creating money, which saves us enormous amounts of rent paying, interest paying every year. That money, which is about, at this moment, 12 billion, but when we have more growth, then it's 20 million. That money should be used to service and to facilitate the public part of our economy. And what's happening here is nothing else as the time and over story that we should balance the left and the right-hand side and the upper and the lower part of our genuine human value orientation. Thank you.
Thank you, Klaas. And before I ask you something about, I have many questions, but let me first give you the organic flowers and the chocolate, which you deserve more than well. You reminded me of one of my favorite teachers. There's so much storytelling in your presentation. I would love to see it back, which we can, by the way, because it's all aired. They're all with us. Where's the camera? Nice. Oh, there you are. Well, nice to have you here, all who are not here. Thanks for watching Klaas, thanks for watching us. And I'm going to look back at this presentation because I was happy to hear in the end that it's all about yin and yang, isn't it? Yeah, it's all about the balance. Are you, in the end, an optimistic man if you look at the state of the world now and where we should go to, where we should be in 2030?
Yes, I actually am, given the fact that there are enormous movements in society from the small scale. The upper right-hand part of this picture is the Schumacher Small is Beautiful world, and we are moving into that more or less as well. That brings balance more or less back, erodes the enormous large left-hand side structures we have faced in the time period of globalization. So balance is coming back a little bit, and I believe that we are in an evolutionary process. So we are having these rounds and routes for centuries. We are facing disaster after disaster. Finally, the moment might come that we are going to see the trick, and we will realize that we should not stay in that periphery, but we should organize to go to the center in terms of policy making, in terms of the financial system, economic system. And well, that is then just an evolutionary step, as we have made in the past many times. So why not this time?
That's good to hear. That's your great disruption. But thanks again, Klaas van Egmond. Thanks for your story. Those were two great, very inspiring presentations.